Good morning, ladies. It's springtime. Well, it's supposedly, the calendar tells us it's springtime, but springtime in Montana can be a very fickle thing. Gardening is quite the challenge when you don't have any idea when the temperature is going to drop down to a dangerous level for these tender, beautiful little flowers that you've purchased at the greenhouse to put into the baskets and the containers in your yard. And so it is a challenge. And I haven't quite figured out the best time to put these flowers outside. So I'm always watching the temperature. Now, gardening in my yard, the particular piece of ground that we have, is challenging also from the standpoint of the soil, because we live on the side of a mountain and we have very rocky soil. We've had to amend the soil and work to get rid of the roots and the rocks and the things that prevent your perennials or your shrubs or your trees from really taking root in a very healthy environment. So what I want to do with our lesson this week in the Beatitudes is to think about that we are preparing the soil of our hearts for a good crop. That we will begin to, as we prepare our hearts, by amending the soil of our hearts, that we will produce bigger, better crops. So what the Beatitudes do is they provide for us good, additional characteristics of our heart that can begin to show up in our lives in some pretty amazing ways. So let's look at the Beatitudes. We're only going to be looking at 2 today, but I'm going to read the entire list because we need to get these in our minds. This is Matthew 5, verses 2 through 12. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, now this is Jesus speaking here. Jesus opened his mouth and taught them, saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you, and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So we see these blessings, these benefits that come with being a born-again believer. You know, just as a person is given the fruit of the Spirit when they're born again, and they're given spiritual gifts when they're born again, in the same way, if we have been born again, we're given these character traits that are mentioned here. They're nurtured and they're developed and they're embraced. There's an observation here that I read this past week in preparation. A pastor named Phil Newton says the significance and purpose of these Beatitudes is that they were not given as commands, but as realities who are part of Christ's kingdom. So as we've looked at these up to this point, those who recognize their spiritual poverty, those who grieve and mourn over the residing sin nature that still lives inside us, those who are meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. We look at those things and we see that God says we're blessed if we have that. And we need to remember that in this context, the blessing is like a statement from God saying, you are very honored, and I am so, God is saying to us that I approve of you when you have these character traits. So as we look at those, we see them as not necessarily from a human perspective all that special or all that desirable, but from God's perspective, these humble attitudes are so important to our having the kind of lives that will benefit us, but benefit the kingdom of God. Jesus is the King of the kingdom. He is the King of the kingdom that is already here on the earth, but is also a kingdom of the future. So let's remember that as we go through these. So today we're going to look at blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. They'll receive mercy from God and from others. The idea of merciful is a beautiful concept, and I love the way William Barclay described it. He says, "Oh, the bliss of the man who gets right inside other people until he can see with their eyes, think with their thoughts, feel with their feelings. For he who does that will find others do the same for him and will know that that is what God in Jesus Christ has done for us." That's similar to what Jesus said in Luke 6:38. He said, "Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, they will pour into your lap. For by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you in return." So the idea here is that as we, as kingdom servants, reflect the heart of our King, which is mercy, that we will give mercy and then receive mercy back. It's a very others-oriented character trait where we are, as William Barclay said, willing to crawl inside another person's situation and have compassion for them. Albert Barnes, another commentator, emphasizes that nowhere in the Christian life do we imitate God more than in showing mercy. In no other thing does God more delight than in the exercise of mercy. You have to stop and think about some of the ways God has shown mercy to you and to me. He showed mercy most primarily and most abundantly, I would say, in his own sacrificial death on the cross, that Jesus would mercifully extend mercy to us by dying in our place. But it didn't stop there. God, and through his Son Jesus and our relationship with him, continues to show us mercy throughout our lives, and in sometimes very unexpected ways. I marvel sometimes at situations that I would be in, sometimes relational situations and sometimes just circumstances that I'm experiencing, and I marvel that God brought me through a particular situation with so much mercy when I did not deserve that mercy, and I had done something maybe hurtful or harmful to myself, and God mercifully intervened. So the point here that Jesus wants to make to us in these Beatitudes is that extending his mercy is something we do because God has extended it to us, but also that we will continue to experience His mercy and the mercy of others as we go through lives. The emphasis is on the feelings of compassion and pity that shows itself in action. We don't stop with a merciful thought. We follow through with it. Mercy without a corresponding action in the life of another person is really meaningless to Jesus. He would be saying, like, what's the point? I gave you mercy. Why are you not extending that same mercy to others? You know, James, when we did our passage, our study in James earlier in the year, I remember that in James 2, verses 15 through 17, he expressed it so clearly and so boldly. He says, suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food, and if one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is that? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is a dead faith. We spend a lot of time talking about that our faith results in action, and that when our faith does not result in action, we should question our faith. What is the nature of the faith that you suppose you have? Is it truly saving faith? As I think it might have been Spurgeon said, a faith that will not change me is a faith that will not save me. And so we want a faith that is powerful enough to turn us into compassionate people. When we see a need, we respond by actively alleviating that person's pain. Now, Matthew 5:7, this particular beatitude can be misinterpreted as a formula for how to get along with people. You know, you be nice to them, and in turn, they'll be nice to you. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, kind of a quid pro quo. But that isn't what God is seeking here in us. Mercy is something that God gives to His children to dispense to those in need. And in the dispensing process, those individuals show that they are true believers and also receive the wonderful reward of more mercy from God. We cannot outgive His mercy to us. We give mercy, and He gives us a refill. So there is something very beautiful happening when we see the need in another person's life, and we are willing and ready and to act on it, and then we go forth and do that. One of the most beautiful but also challenging passages in the New Testament, I think, of Jesus speaking about mercy is, and he never uses the word mercy, but I think you'll see that this is what he's talking about, is in Matthew 25, 31 to 46. It's a parable that Jesus is teaching about the judgment day. So I'm going to read it in two sections. I'm going to read 31 through 40 and then 41 through 46. When the Son of Man comes in His glory and all the angels with Him, He will sit on His glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before Him, and He will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on His right and the goats on His left. Then the King will say to those on His right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, and take your inheritance, the kingdom that was prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? And the king will reply, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these my brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Now, I hope that you see some of the most incredible things that Jesus is saying here. First of all, he's saying that those of us who have been born again are to be placed on his right hand, and he calls us sheep. Okay, we are his people, the sheep of his pasture. And so he calls us to himself on this day of judgment, and he sits us to his right. But he says to us, the reason I'm doing this for you is because you were merciful. You did exactly what I designed you to do. I gave you the capacity to be a merciful person, and you proved your relationship to me by doing it. But it's so interesting, the response of the people. They're like, Lord, I don't remember doing that for you. When did I do that for you? Well, of course, his response is, when you did it for another person, you were doing it for me. And that is just so, what a beautiful reminder that when we serve others, we're serving Jesus. It's how Jesus operates on this planet. While he is in heaven, he has to operate through us to benefit those who need his touch. And so for us to neglect that, the way this passage is set up would suggest that we aren't sheep if we're not doing these things, if we're not serving others. And he mentions that the others that we are to serve are the least of these. These are the people that are the most needy in our culture, and that we must go low and stoop to respond in a Christ-like way to those who do not have the wherewithal, for whatever the circumstances are, to provide for themselves, that we are to do that for them. So there's such a lot here, but we have to go forward and read the rest of the passage to get the full picture. Then Jesus said, this is verse 41, then Jesus said to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. This is not good news. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. They also will answer, hey, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and didn't help you? He says, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. And then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. The eternal punishment that he's describing here is horrific. The eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels is a very real thing. It's not symbolic. It isn't just annihilation. It's a very real situation, a set of circumstances that lasts forever. It never, the fire never consumes. The fire simply tortures. And I know that this is not something that we like to hear, but it's my commitment to tell you the truth. And the truth is that if we are not expressing compassion, we're not being punished for not expressing the compassion. But what he's saying is, by not expressing the compassion, you're revealing the truth of your heart, that the Spirit of Jesus Christ is not in you. And so there's a very strong warning here for all of us, especially for us as believers, that if we are avoiding getting our hands dirty, then there's a strong indication here that we don't actually belong to him, to Jesus. So, heavy-duty stuff there, and I have been challenged by this my own self, that there are opportunities around me to bless another person with compassion, with mercy. And so that's something that I am challenged by it, and I want to look for opportunities that are around me where I can step in and extend mercy to someone. The next one we're looking at is blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Now I want to deal with this idea of seeing God before we move on to what it means to be pure in heart. This idea of seeing God has really three fulfillments in the future that are associated with seeing God. First of all, we will be admitted directly into his presence. I don't know about you, but I've noticed in the last few years that more and more, if I make an appointment to see a doctor, when you walk into the exam room, you realize that, or while you're waiting in the exam room, the person that opens the door to see you is often not a doctor. Often it's an assistant. And so it's frustrating. And what Jesus is telling us today is that in the kingdom that is to come, not here on the planet now, but in the kingdom that is yet to come, we will see God face to face, not another, not someone who he sends as a substitute, but he himself. We will see God face to face, and it will be glorious. The second thing that we will see is we will see him in the sense of his glory being fully expressed and without a filter. Now we only see his glory as expressed in creation. Lightning, thunder, roaring seas, majestic mountains, the tiniest little butterfly, the hummingbirds. I mean, we see God's glory every single day in some way. What we're going to see in the future, in that time where we are face to face with the Lord, is his glory that will be the very light in which we move and have our being. His glory will be so radiant that it will be blinding to us. It will be hard to even to look on him. But for some reason or other, I do think that we're going to have special glasses that we will be able to see his glory in its fullness. And the third thing, when we see God, I think we're going to see the fullness of his grace. Because, now we experience his grace in every good gift and blessing that he has for us. We see his grace in all these incredibly little ways that he impacts our lives. In the little details, we see his grace. But one day, we're going to see God's grace fully explained to us. In other words, I think that we're going to see the reason behind all the little ways that God intervened and what he was doing, what he was trying to accomplish. And it will be such a blessing to us. Now let's talk about what a pure heart is. And I'm going to start by saying what it does not mean. 1 John 1, verse 8 says, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. Verse 10, if we say we have not sinned, we make him a liar and his word is not in us. So the pure heart does not mean that we have no sin, because 1 John says that all of us as believers still sin, okay? And to pretend that it doesn't is deception, and to pretend that it doesn't exist, we're calling God a liar. And that his word, the Bible, the words of Scripture, do not reside in us. And so that person really isn't even a believer. Another example of the fact that this does not mean sinless is Isaiah. Remember Isaiah chapter 6, where Isaiah was brought into the throne room of heaven, and he actually got to see God. And he says, woe is me, for I am undone. I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. In other words, he is seeing God face to face, and he is still in a sinful state. And so it's undoing him, if you will. And so being in the face of God in the kingdom to come, we will then be sinless. But in the kingdom that is still here on earth, even when we spiritually go into his presence in prayer, we are still people with sin in us. So pure of heart doesn't mean sinless. But there are a few scriptures that I think give us a clue to understand what pure in heart does mean. Psalm 24, 3 and 4 says, who shall ascend the hill of the Lord? Who shall stand in his holy place? Well, the answer is, he who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false, and does not swear deceitfully. So the question here is, who has a pure heart? Who is the one who is able to stand before God? And he says, the one who has clean hands and a pure heart. And he describes this as the person who does not lift up his soul to what is false. Now let's think about that for a second. Do we sometimes lift up our souls to something that is not of him? Something worldly, something that is not of his truth. You know, we're called to abide in his truth, but we don't always do that, do we? We expose ourselves to things that are not truthful on the television or on the computer, or however we expose ourselves, our souls, to something that is dirty and that does not build us up in our relationship with God. And he goes on and he says, and the person who has a pure heart does not swear deceitfully. And the idea there is presenting ourselves as something that is deceitful. And I really wonder here if God is talking maybe about sometimes when we as people who call ourselves Christians live lives that say otherwise, live lives that are hypocritical, that are trying to tell you one thing, but we are living a lie. And so I think that passage really does describe that what the pure in heart does not do. The pure in heart does not say a certain thing that we want others to believe, and then do not live that out in our lives. Again, to James, James verse 4, verse 8 says, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you men of double mind. All right, so the idea here in pure hearts is people who do not have a double mind. So he's saying, as believers, we are to have pure hearts that are not compromised hearts. The idea of double-mindedness we've talked about quite a lot when we were looking at at King David a couple of summers ago, maybe 3 years ago, who had a pure heart. And he was always asking God to create in me a pure heart. And the idea is single-minded, single-heartedness, single goal, not being compromising in any way. We've used the expression before of having one foot in the boat and another foot on the dock is a dangerous place to be, because that you can just picture that scene where you're doing the split, trying to ride both sides of this thing. And so we are not to be fence sitters. We are not to sit on the fence and try to live life with one foot in Jesus and the other foot in the world. And so a pure heart will not do that. Jesus said to the disciples in Matthew 22:37, love the Lord your God with all your heart. So what we're saying here in purity of heart, it's to will one thing, one singular position in our lives. And that one singular position is God's truth and God's preeminence in everything that I do. I want to align myself with the truths of God's word and to elevate God in every area of my life. So if I want to have a pure heart, I want to pursue him with complete single-mindedness. It is to will that in my life, to make that my daily determination that is what my life will look like. And I hope you know, go back to our verse. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. If my heart is not single-minded, singularly focused on God and completely committed to not living a double life, I won't see God. Okay? That's just the way it is. I can't walk through this life without being singular in my goals, singular in my commitment, singular in my devotion. That's a huge, huge statement. There's a verse in Hebrews, and I don't remember yes, here it is. Hebrews 12:14. He says, strive for peace with everyone and for holiness, because without that, no one will see the Lord. Now, the word holiness is another way simply of saying pure in heart. When we have a single-minded heart that wills God's value in everything we do, we're striving for both holiness and purity. And so this is very concerning to us. I hope that this is something that's kind of shaking you in your boots a little bit. I mean, at this point, we're as undone as Isaiah was when he cried out, woe is me. I am undone. This passage should cause us to realize that we have a tall order in front of us. It's like the disciples' response to Jesus when he told them, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart." And they said, "Jesus, how is that even possible?" Or when the time they said, when Jesus said that it is harder for a rich man to get to heaven than it is for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, they said, "Well, then how can anybody be saved?" You know what Jesus' answer was? He says, "With men it's impossible, but with God, all things are possible." In other words, God creates a thirst for purity of heart in us so that we can pursue purity of heart. It's by His grace, though, that we must seek that gift by praying along with King David, "Create in me a pure heart, O God. Create in me the desire for a pure heart. Create in me the desire to not compromise my affections between you and the world." We must look to Christ, who gave Himself for us to purify for Himself a people. You know, that's in Titus 2:14, that His desire is for us to have a pure heart, but He's the one who does it. We can't make that happen in us. God is the one who purifies our hearts. And the instrument with which He does this, how He cleans us, is faith. So, therefore, we trust in the Lord with all of our heart. We don't lean on our own understanding. In all our ways, we acknowledge Him, and He will build our faith, and building our faith results in the purity of heart. We must will this in our lives. We must set our faces like flint to this goal of an uncompromising heart. And as we do that, walking day by day, step by step, trusting in Him and not leaning on our own understandings, that our faith will grow and He will grow our hearts into purity. I hope that is your goal. I hope that you so desire to one day see God face to face, that this will become the heartbeat of your life. Thank you for listening, and we will be back together next week with Blessed Are the Peacemakers. Talk to you again soon.